Welcome, everyone. Tonight's video is a calm look into the world of ancient Egypt, from how society was structured to the powerful and mysterious role of the pharaoh. So go ahead and tuck yourself in, get cozy, and let your thoughts drift as we take a quiet journey through time. And if you enjoy these peaceful stories, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps more people find these cozy little escapes. Now take a deep breath and let's begin. Beneath the endless sky of ancient Egypt, along the winding path of the life-giving Nile, stretched a society carefully woven into a complex hierarchy, a delicate pyramid of power and place that shaped every person's life. At the very pinnacle stood the pharaoh, the living embodiment of divine will, whose presence was as constant and unyielding as the desert sun. Seen not merely as a ruler, but as a god among men, the pharaoh's word was law, his commands flowing like the Nile itself, touching every corner of the kingdom. His role transcended that of a political leader. He was the guarantor of Ma'at, the sacred principle of order, truth, and harmony that balanced the universe. From his grand palace, surrounded by gold and the reverent whispers of priests, the pharaoh's authority radiated downward, connecting him intimately to every layer of society below. Just beneath this divine sovereign were the priests and scribes, custodians of knowledge and faith. These men held a quiet but immense power, for they maintained the spiritual fabric of Egypt and the mechanisms of its governance. Scribes, with their reed brushes and papyrus scrolls, recorded the words of kings and gods alike, keeping the kingdom's vast bureaucracy running smoothly. Their education and literacy set them apart, giving them the ability to interpret law, tax records, and sacred texts. Priests, adorned in linen robes and carrying the sacred symbols of their gods, performed rituals designed to maintain the favor of the deities and ensure the continued prosperity of the land. This religious caste stood as intermediaries between the mortal world and the divine, upholding traditions that justified the social order itself. Next in the hierarchy were the nobles and officials, the trusted stewards who managed the wealth and lands of the kingdom. These individuals enjoyed a life of privilege, often living in comfortable estates and surrounded by servants, yet their status came with weighty responsibilities. Charged with collecting taxes, overseeing agriculture, and administering justice in their regions, nobles acted as the pharaoh's hands across the vast land. Their days were filled with managing affairs large and small, ensuring that the machinery of the state continued to function without disruption. While they shared in the luxury of fine foods, intricate clothing, and the company of artists and entertainers, their lives were also shaped by a rigid expectation of loyalty and the constant presence of court intrigue. Beneath the nobles were the skilled artisans and craftsmen, the creators whose hands shaped Egypt's cultural legacy. Sculptors, painters, metalworkers, and weavers labored to create the timeless art and architecture for which Egypt is renowned. Their work adorned temples, palaces, and tombs, telling stories of gods and kings through images and monuments that still capture our imagination today. Despite the respect accorded to their skill, these artisans lived modest lives, their days often spent bent over chisels or looms under the hot sun or in shaded workshops. Their art was an offering to both gods and rulers, a vital part of the civilization's spiritual and cultural expression, but behind the beauty lay long hours of demanding labor. At the base of this grand structure were the farmers and laborers, the foundation upon which the entire society rested. These men and women rose with the dawn to tend the fertile banks of the Nile, planting and harvesting crops that fed the kingdom. Their lives followed the rhythms of the river and the seasons, governed by the flood cycle that both gave and took life. The work was physically exhausting and often precarious, yet it was essential for sustaining not only the populace, but also the wealth that allowed Egypt's monumental achievements. Though they held a humble place in the social order, farmers and laborers formed the backbone of society, their toil binding the great civilization together. Finally, the slaves and servants occupied the lowest rung, often invisible in grand narratives, but vital in daily reality. Their labor built the tombs, carried goods, and sustained the households of the upper classes. While some were prisoners of war, others were indebted individuals or born into servitude. Though their freedoms were limited, their lives were not without moments of quiet resilience and community. They shared in the everyday rhythms of Egyptian life, finding comfort in companionship and small joys amid hardship. The rigid hierarchy did not erase their humanity, even as it demanded obedience. Together, these layers formed a living, breathing system, one marked by both grandeur and hardship, order and obedience. Each person, from the pharaoh who claimed divine authority to the laborer whose hands shaped the land, understood their place within this structure. It was a world where power flowed downward and duty flowed upward, a balance sustained by faith, law, and tradition. Though the hierarchy could be unforgiving, it was also a framework that offered stability and purpose in a world shaped by the eternal rhythms of the Nile and the immutable laws of Maat. In the timeless lands of ancient Egypt, each stratum of society carried its own duties and rhythms, shaping a way of life that was as varied as the banks of the Nile itself. Though the hierarchy formed a clear structure, life in each class was defined not only by rank, but by the daily tasks, responsibilities, and rituals that bound individuals to their place within the great tapestry of Egyptian civilization. Through these roles, the people of Egypt found purpose, identity, and belonging, each contributing in their own way to the harmony and prosperity of their world. At the summit, the Pharaoh's day was a delicate balance of ritual, governance, and divine representation. Rising before dawn, the pharaoh was greeted by attendants who helped prepare him for ceremonies that were as much spiritual acts as political statements. Dressed in linen robes embroidered with gold thread, he would present himself before the gods in the great temples, offering prayers and sacrifices to maintain Maat, the cosmic balance. The pharaoh's responsibilities extended beyond the temple walls. He was the ultimate judge, commander of armies, and the guardian of the people's welfare. Although surrounded by luxury, his life was one of great discipline and weighty expectation, for the fate of the kingdom rested on his shoulders. Supporting the pharaoh's sacred role were the priests and scribes, whose daily lives were filled with a blend of spiritual devotion and practical administration. Priests began their days before sunrise, performing rituals designed to honor the gods and secure their favor. In the cool, shaded chambers of the temples, they lit incense, chanted hymns, and tended sacred fires, their movements slow and purposeful, imbued with solemn reverence. Beyond the spiritual, priests also played crucial roles as educators, healers, and advisors, weaving themselves into the very fabric of Egyptian society. Meanwhile, scribes carried the immense responsibility of recording events, maintaining tax records, and drafting decrees. Their work required years of rigorous training, as they mastered the complex hieroglyphic script and the nuances of administration. The quill and papyrus were their tools of power, allowing them to shape the governance and culture of Egypt with quiet authority. Nobles and officials, placed just below the spiritual class, lived lives that mixed governance with privilege. Their days were governed by duties that ranged from managing agricultural estates and collecting taxes to overseeing construction projects and legal matters. Many nobles owned vast lands worked by peasants and laborers, and it was their task to ensure these estates were productive and profitable. Meetings with stewards and workers, inspections of crops, and coordination with tax collectors filled their schedules. Though their responsibilities were great, nobles also enjoyed a life of refinement, often hosting feasts where musicians, dancers, and storytellers enlivened the night. Their homes were decorated with fine furniture, paintings, and sculptures, reflecting their status and taste. Yet behind the wealth lay the constant pressure to maintain favor with the pharaoh and navigate the shifting politics of court life. Beneath the nobles, the skilled artisans and craftsmen formed the creative heart of Egypt. These men and women dedicated their lives to the mastery of craft, whether carving stone statues, painting murals, weaving linen, or shaping precious metals into intricate jewelry. The artisan's day began early, often in workshops filled with the scent of wood, paint, and earth. Their work was both a livelihood and a sacred duty, as many creations were destined for temples, tombs, or the pharaoh himself. Despite the demanding nature of their labor, artisans took pride in their skill, passing techniques down through generations. Their creativity and dedication left an enduring legacy, imbuing Egypt with beauty and symbolism that still captivates the modern world. Farmers and laborers made up the largest and most essential class, their lives inextricably linked to the rhythms of the Nile. Rising with the first light, these men and women began their work by preparing the fields, planting seeds, and tending to crops. The annual inundation of the Nile was both a blessing and a challenge, depositing rich silt to nourish the earth, but also requiring careful management to protect the land from flooding. Laborers also contributed to monumental building projects, from erecting temples to constructing the Great Pyramids. Their work was often physically grueling, done under the fierce Egyptian sun with simple tools and steady determination. Yet their labor was the foundation upon which Egypt's prosperity rested, and their communities were tightly knit, sharing festivals, meals, and moments of respite along the riverbanks. At the base of this vast social pyramid were the slaves and servants, who carried out many of the most demanding and thankless tasks. Though their status was the lowest and their freedoms limited, these individuals were woven into the daily lives of all other classes. They maintained households, prepared food, cared for animals, and labored on farms and construction sites. Some slaves were prisoners of war, while others were born into servitude or sold to pay debts. Despite the harshness of their position, they found ways to build communities, form families, and practice traditions that offered comfort and dignity. Their resilience and endurance were an unseen but vital part of the Egyptian world. Throughout these classes, justice and obedience shaped daily life, enforced by a system designed to maintain order and harmony. Laws governed everything from property and marriage to crime and punishment, with an emphasis on restoring balance rather than retribution. Magistrates and officials oversaw courts where disputes were settled, often guided by the principle of Ma'at. While punishments could be severe, the legal system was also focused on social stability, encouraging cooperation and respect for the hierarchy. In this intricate web of roles and responsibilities, the people of ancient Egypt lived lives that were deeply interconnected. Their identities were formed not just by their social rank, but by the duties and rituals that gave structure to their days. Whether praying in the temple, carving a statue, tending crops, or serving a household, each person played a part in a civilization that valued order, tradition, and the harmony of the whole. This daily rhythm, grounded in work and faith, created a society that was resilient and enduring. Though marked by challenges and hardships, life in ancient Egypt was also rich, with moments of celebration, art, and human connection. The steady flow of the Nile mirrored the flow of life itself, ever-present, reliable, and sustaining the bonds between ruler and subject, noble and commoner, craftsman and laborer. Through their shared roles and responsibilities, the people of Egypt built not just a kingdom, but a legacy that continues to inspire awe and wonder thousands of years later. In the vast and ordered world of ancient Egypt, power was a force both visible and unseen, flowing through the veins of society like the Nile itself. Yet unlike the sudden storms or the unpredictable floodwaters, power in Egypt was steady, deliberate, and intertwined with a deep respect for balance and harmony. This power was not merely wielded by force. It was a sacred trust, a divine responsibility vested in rulers and enforcers alike to maintain Ma'at, the eternal principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order that governed both gods and men. At the heart of Egyptian power stood the pharaoh, whose authority was absolute yet framed by religious and cultural expectations. As a living god on earth, the pharaoh was the source of law and justice, the ultimate judge who ensured that the people lived in accordance with Ma'at. His decrees were carried out by officials and magistrates who governed towns and provinces, acting as his eyes and ears throughout the land. This delegation of authority created a network of control that was both rigid and remarkably efficient, allowing the pharaoh's will to shape everyday life without constant personal intervention. Justice in ancient Egypt was not conceived as revenge or punishment for its own sake. Instead, it was an instrument to restore balance when order was threatened. The legal system was built on the idea that every action disturbed or upheld Ma'at, and thus every dispute or crime required resolution that returned harmony to society. Courts were held regularly, where disputes over land, debts, or family matters were settled by local judges. These judges were often chosen for their wisdom and integrity, tasked with interpreting laws that were deeply rooted in religious principles. The goal was not only to punish wrongdoing, but also to encourage cooperation and maintain social cohesion. Obedience to authority was both a practical necessity and a spiritual duty. For ordinary Egyptians, obeying the laws and respecting the hierarchy was part of the sacred order that kept the world functioning as it should. Children were taught from a young age to honor their parents and rulers, understanding their place within the greater design of society. Work and duty were not just economic obligations, they were acts of devotion that contributed to the welfare of all. Even the harshness of some punishments was tempered by the belief that discipline was necessary to preserve peace and prosperity. The enforcement of laws could be strict, but it was rarely arbitrary. Crimes such as theft, assault, or disrespect towards the gods were taken seriously because they threatened the balance of Ma'at. However, punishments were often proportional and aimed at restitution or deterrence rather than cruelty. For instance, fines, forced labor, or public shaming might be imposed, with physical punishment reserved for the most serious offenses. This system reflected an understanding that order must be preserved not by fear alone, but by a shared commitment to justice and mutual respect. Power extended beyond courts and rulers into daily rituals and the spiritual lives of the people. Temples were centers not only of worship, but also of social control, where priests reinforced the authority of the pharaoh and the gods through ceremonies and teachings. These rituals reminded the people of their duties and their place within the cosmic order. The idea that the gods watched over the land and its people gave divine legitimacy to the laws and the hierarchy, making obedience a sacred pact between mortal and divine. Within households, this sense of order was mirrored on a smaller scale. Fathers ruled their families with authority, but also with responsibility for the welfare and education of their children. Wives and mothers managed the home and taught their children the values of respect, honesty, and diligence. Servants and slaves, though at the bottom of the social ladder, were expected to be loyal and faithful, their obedience seen as part of maintaining the family's honor and stability. This microcosm of order reflected the broader social structure and reinforced the idea that harmony depended on each person fulfilling their role. Even in the realm of labor, obedience was woven into the fabric of life. Workers on the fields, artisans in workshops, and builders of monuments all operated within systems of supervision and discipline. Foremen and overseers ensured that tasks were completed efficiently, yet there was often a shared sense of pride in the work itself, a recognition that their efforts were part of a greater whole. The rhythm of labor, like the rising and setting of the sun, was a steady drumbeat that sustained the life of Egypt. This balance of power, justice, and obedience did not mean a world without challenges. Tensions could arise between classes, and harsh realities were faced daily by many. Yet the prevailing belief in Ma'at provided a framework for understanding these difficulties as part of a larger cosmic design. Suffering and hardship were seen as temporary disturbances, correctable through the proper exercise of justice and the reaffirmation of order. This perspective encouraged resilience, patience, and acceptance, qualities that shaped the character of the Egyptian people. Ultimately, the nature of power in ancient Egypt was a delicate blend of authority and responsibility, control and care. It was a system that sought not only to govern, but to harmonize, binding together the divine, the ruler, and the people in a shared commitment to the stability and prosperity of the land. Through justice tempered by mercy and obedience grounded in faith, Egypt's hierarchy endured for millennia, a testament to the power of balance and the human capacity to live within it. In ancient Egypt, religion was not simply a part of life. It was the very foundation upon which the entire society was built and sustained. The beliefs and rituals that permeated every corner of Egyptian existence provided a sacred framework that justified the hierarchy, giving divine meaning to the structure of power and social order. This spiritual foundation was woven deeply into the culture, reinforcing the roles of pharaoh, priests, nobles, and common people alike, and offering each individual a sense of purpose within the grand design of the universe. At the center of Egyptian religion stood the concept of Ma'at, the principle of cosmic balance, truth, and harmony. Ma'at was not merely an abstract ideal, it was a living force that governed the heavens, the earth, and the lives of men. It was the pharaoh's sacred duty to uphold Ma'at, ensuring that the forces of chaos and disorder were held at bay. This divine responsibility granted the pharaoh not only political authority, but spiritual legitimacy. Seen as the earthly embodiment of Horus and the son of the sun god Ra, the pharaoh's rule was ordained by the gods themselves, making his position untouchable and eternal. His decrees were seen as the will of the divine, and obedience to his authority was considered an act of religious devotion. Religion permeated the lives of priests and scribes, who acted as intermediaries between the gods and the people. These men were guardians of sacred knowledge, interpreters of divine will, and caretakers of temple rituals. Their power stemmed not only from their education, but also from their role as spiritual guides, who conducted ceremonies designed to maintain the favor of the gods, and by extension, the stability of the realm. Temples were more than places of worship. They were centers of learning, economic activity, and political influence. Through their stewardship of religious rites, priests upheld the social order, reminding the populace of their place in the divine hierarchy and the importance of obedience. The gods themselves embodied the values and roles found throughout Egyptian society, providing divine examples for each class. Pharaohs mirrored the sun god Ra's life-giving power. Warriors reflected the strength of gods like Set and Anha. Fertility and agriculture were blessed by gods such as Osiris and Isis. These deities personified the qualities that sustain the world, and their stories reinforced the legitimacy of human rulers and social roles. By aligning themselves with these divine archetypes, individuals in every class found spiritual validation for their duties and hardships. Religious festivals and rituals punctuated the calendar, serving both to honor the gods and to reaffirm social bonds. These celebrations were communal experiences where the entire society gathered to participate in processions, offerings, and feasts. They provided opportunities for people to connect with their faith and with one another, strengthening the shared belief in the cosmic order and the social hierarchy it supported. The rhythms of religious life created a sense of continuity and stability, anchoring society amid the changing seasons and the uncertainties of daily existence. Even the concept of the afterlife was deeply entwined with the justification of hierarchy. Egyptians believed that a well-ordered life, lived in accordance with Ma'at, would lead to eternal peace in the fields of paradise. This belief reinforced moral behavior and respect for authority, as each person sought to ensure their place in the next world through loyalty and righteousness in this one. The elaborate funerary practices and tomb constructions were expressions of this faith, symbolizing both status and the hope for immortality. The pharaoh's tomb, grander than any other, was a testament to his divine status and his journey to join the gods after death. For common people, religion offered comfort and meaning amidst the challenges of daily life. Temples and shrines dotted villages and fields, places where ordinary Egyptians could pray, offer gifts, and seek protection from the gods. Personal piety and devotion created a sense of connection to the divine that transcended social rank. In moments of hardship or uncertainty, belief provided hope and a framework for understanding the world's complexities. Through prayer and ritual, individuals found a way to participate in the sacred order and affirm their place within it. Thus, religion in ancient Egypt was more than a set of beliefs. It was the lifeblood of the social hierarchy. It sanctified power, justified obedience, and offered a vision of a harmonious universe in which every person, from pharaoh to laborer, had a vital role to play. This spiritual foundation helped to sustain a civilization that endured for millennia, its legacy etched in stone and story, forever reflecting the profound connection between faith and society. In the vast and ordered world of ancient Egypt, behind the towering pyramids and flowing robes, lived countless individuals whose stories often go unheard. Each person, no matter their place in the hierarchy, carried dreams, fears, and hopes, human experiences that transcended social rank and time. To truly understand the fabric of this ancient society, it is essential to peer gently into the everyday lives of its people, recognizing their shared humanity and the quiet resilience that sustained them. Imagine a day in the life of a pharaoh, the divine ruler whose presence commanded reverence across the land. His mornings might begin with the soft light of dawn filtering through palace windows, accompanied by the whispered greetings of attendants preparing him for the rituals that defined his sacred role. While his life was filled with luxury and power, it was also burdened by the immense responsibility of safeguarding Ma'at and the welfare of his people. Behind the golden masks and regal titles was a man bound by duty, whose decisions shaped the destiny of millions. In solitude, he might contemplate the weight of his crown, balancing the expectations of gods and mortals alike. Nearby, in the cool shadows of a temple, a priest prepares for the day's ceremonies. His hands carefully arrange offerings of bread and incense, his voice rising in hymns meant to please the gods and maintain the cosmic order. The priest's life was one of discipline and devotion, steeped in knowledge passed down through generations. Yet beyond the solemn rituals lay a community leader, healer, and educator, someone who touched the lives of ordinary people seeking guidance and comfort. His role bridged the divine and the mundane, reminding all that even the highest spiritual duties were rooted in service. In a bustling noble's estate, a woman oversees the household with quiet authority. She manages servants, plans meals, and ensures that the estate runs smoothly. Her days might be filled with teaching children, organizing festivals, or tending to the garden's fragrant herbs. Though she enjoyed privileges denied to many, her life was shaped by expectations to maintain status, uphold family honor, and navigate the complexities of court politics. In moments of calm, she may have sought solace in poetry or music, finding personal joy amid the demands of her role. Down by the riverbanks, a skilled artisan begins his work as the sun climbs higher. With steady hands, he carves a statue destined for a temple, each chisel stroke a blend of craftsmanship and devotion. The artisan's world was one of precision and patience, where the quality of his work reflected not only his skill, but his reverence for the gods and the pharaoh. Though his labor was demanding and often solitary, it brought pride and purpose, a legacy carved in stone that would outlast his lifetime. In the fertile fields, a farmer rises before dawn, preparing for a day dictated by the cycles of the Nile. His hands, calloused from years of toil, sow seeds that will feed his family and the kingdom. Life in the fields was hard and uncertain, dependent on the river's rhythms and the changing seasons. Yet amidst the labor, there were moments of laughter shared with neighbors, stories exchanged under the shade of palm trees, and celebrations of the harvest that brought the community together. The farmer's existence was humble but essential, a testament to endurance and hope. Even those at the lowest rungs of society, the slaves and servants, found ways to nurture their humanity. Bound by circumstance yet not broken in spirit, they formed tight-knit communities, shared tales of old, and cared for one another. Their days were filled with hard work, carrying stones, preparing meals, or tending animals, but their lives also contained moments of kindness, humor, and dreams of freedom. They participated in festivals, prayed to gods for protection, and found comfort in family bonds that transcended social status. Through these glimpses, it becomes clear that ancient Egyptian society was not merely a rigid hierarchy of roles and duties, but a living mosaic of human experiences. Each individual navigated their place within the system with courage, faith, and resilience, contributing to a civilization that valued order yet was built upon the shared lives of many. Their stories, though separated by class and circumstance, are united by the timeless threads of hope, love, and the search for meaning. In contemplating these lives, we are reminded that history is not only made by kings and priests, but by the quiet strength of those who lived, loved, and labored beneath the great monuments. Their humanity breathes life into the stones and scrolls, inviting us to connect across millennia with the enduring spirit of ancient Egypt. In the enduring landscape of ancient Egypt, life was a delicate balance between order and hardship, woven together like the threads of a finely crafted tapestry. The steady rhythm of the Nile's waters symbolized this harmony, bringing both fertile abundance and the challenge of survival. The society that flourished along its banks was built upon the unwavering principles of structure, duty, and faith. Yet beneath this calm exterior lay the realities of labor, sacrifice, and resilience. Order was the foundation upon which Egyptian civilization stood. The strict hierarchy, the laws grounded in Ma'at, and the religious ceremonies all worked to maintain stability in a world that could easily slip into chaos. Every individual, from pharaoh to laborer, was part of this intricate system, their roles designed to support the whole. This sense of purpose provided comfort and meaning, guiding daily life with clear expectations and shared values. The harmony of the social order was seen as a reflection of the cosmic balance, connecting human endeavors to the divine. Yet, alongside this order was the undeniable presence of hardship. The lives of many were marked by toil under the blazing sun, scarcity during difficult seasons, and the ever-present weight of social constraints. Laborers and farmers faced physical exhaustion and the uncertainties of nature's cycles. The lower classes bore the heaviest burdens, with limited freedoms and strict obedience demanded by those above. Even the pharaoh, for all his power, carried the immense responsibility of safeguarding his people and upholding Ma'at. This coexistence of order and hardship was not seen as contradictory, but complementary. Challenges were understood as tests of endurance and faith, necessary components of a balanced life. The belief in divine justice and the promise of an afterlife offered hope beyond present struggles. Rituals and festivals provided respite and communal strength, moments when the hardships of daily life were softened by celebration and shared belief. In this way, ancient Egypt's civilization was sustained not just by laws and power, but by the resilience of its people, united in a commitment to maintain balance amid life's trials. The interplay of order and hardship shaped a culture of strength, faith, and harmony that continues to inspire awe across the ages. Birth and early life of a pharaoh. In the ancient world of Egypt, the birth of a pharaoh was not merely a family event, but a moment of profound cosmic significance. It was believed that with the arrival of the newborn, the divine order itself was renewed. The palace, nestled near the banks of the life-giving Nile, became a place of hushed excitement and sacred ceremony. From the first breath, the child was marked as different, destined to be the living link between gods and men. The day of the royal birth was accompanied by rituals intended to protect the mother and child, and to welcome the infant into a world filled with both privilege and great responsibility. Priests chanted ancient hymns, invoking the blessings of the gods. Incense filled the air, its fragrant smoke rising like prayers toward the sky. Women from the royal household, skilled in the arts of healing and midwifery, attended the mother, ensuring her comfort and safety. The newborn was gently wrapped in fine linens, embroidered with symbols meant to guard and guide him through his life. From the earliest days, the child's life was carefully shaped by tradition and expectation. He was not merely a boy, but the seed of Ma'at, the principle of truth and order that balanced the universe. His role as future pharaoh was taught not only through lessons, but through the constant presence of symbolism and ritual. He learned to recognize the sacred signs that surrounded him, the lotus and papyrus plants representing Upper and Lower Egypt, the double crowns symbolizing his future rule over a united land, and the sun disk reminding him of his divine heritage. Education began early and was rigorous. Tutors and priests guided the young prince through the sacred texts and stories of the gods, teaching him the language of hieroglyphs, the very script of divine communication. He was instructed in the laws and customs that would govern his reign, the principles of justice and mercy, and the stories of great kings who had come before. But education was not only intellectual, it was deeply spiritual. The boy learned rituals of purification and offerings, understanding that his strength and wisdom were gifts from the gods that must be nurtured and respected. The palace walls echoed with the sounds of learning and play. The young prince practiced archery and wrestling, training his body as well as his mind. Music floated through the halls, with flutes and harps accompanying songs that praised the gods and the pharaoh's future greatness. Despite the grandeur, childhood was also marked by moments of tenderness, a mother's lullaby, the gentle touch of a nursemaid, the laughter of siblings or playmates from noble families. These small, human moments offered balance to the heavy expectations that would one day rest upon his shoulders. As he grew, the prince was gradually introduced to the complexities of leadership. He observed court officials and priests performing their duties, listening carefully to the flow of decisions and ceremonies. The advisors, wise and sometimes stern, taught him about governance, diplomacy, and the delicate art of maintaining favor with powerful nobles and priests. The boy learned that leadership was as much about patience and understanding as it was about strength and command. Within the palace, the spiritual dimension of his future role was ever present. Priests led him through rituals designed to prepare his spirit for the divine responsibilities ahead. He was taught that he was the earthly manifestation of Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship, and that his reign was a sacred duty to uphold Ma'at, the harmony between heaven and earth. This belief shaped his identity, grounding him in a purpose that transcended mere politics. Despite the layers of ceremony and expectation, the prince remained a child, curious, sometimes playful, occasionally rebellious. His days were a blend of structured lessons and moments of exploration, where he might wander the palace gardens or watch the boats glide silently along the Nile. In these quiet moments, away from the watchful eyes of tutors and priests, he could dream freely of the future and imagine the world he would one day govern. The bond between the young pharaoh and his family was both personal and political. His mother, often regarded as a semi-divine figure herself, played a vital role in nurturing and protecting him. The relationship between father and son was one of both affection and instruction, the older king preparing the heir for the heavy mantle of rule. Siblings and extended family members, while sometimes rivals in the complex web of palace politics, also provided companionship and support. As the years passed, the boy grew into a young man ready to take on his destiny. The transition from prince to pharaoh was marked by solemn ceremonies and rites of passage, culminating in his coronation. But before that moment, his early life was a sacred journey, a time of learning, growth, and preparation that laid the foundation for the remarkable role he would assume. Through education, ritual, and the quiet nurturing of his spirit, the future pharaoh was shaped to be both a leader of men and a servant of the gods, entrusted with the eternal task of maintaining balance in a world defined by order and faith. Coronation and divine ascension. The transition from prince to pharaoh was a moment unlike any other in ancient Egypt, a sacred rite that transformed a mortal child into the living embodiment of divine authority. The coronation was far more than a ceremony. It was a powerful affirmation of the cosmic order, a public and spiritual event that reaffirmed the bond between heaven and earth and marked the beginning of a ruler's journey to uphold Ma'at, the eternal balance. In the days leading up to the coronation, the palace and city buzzed with preparation and quiet reverence. Priests and officials rehearsed their parts in the sacred rituals. Artisans crafted ceremonial robes and crowns, and the people of Egypt prepared to witness the moment their new pharaoh would be made manifest. The air was thick with incense, and the steady beat of drums echoed through the streets, weaving a sense of anticipation and solemnity. On the day itself, the pharaoh-to-be was dressed in linen robes of the finest quality, often embroidered with gold thread and adorned with sacred symbols. The most iconic of these symbols was the double crown, representing the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, two lands that the pharaoh ruled as one. Wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt together was a powerful visual statement of his sovereignty over the entire realm. The new pharaoh was also presented with the crook and flail, emblems of kingship that symbolized his role as both shepherd and provider. The crook, gently curved like a shepherd's staff, represented his duty to guide and protect his people. The flail, a symbol of agricultural fertility and the power to enforce order, reminded all that the pharaoh's role included both nurture and discipline. These items were more than regalia. They were sacred tools that connected the pharaoh to the gods and his subjects alike. The coronation ceremony took place in the presence of the highest priests, nobles, and officials, often in the grand temple complex where gods were believed to dwell. The newly crowned pharaoh was anointed with oils and blessed with prayers, invoking the protection and favor of the gods. Hymns filled the air as priests chanted invocations to Horus, Ra, and other deities, calling upon their power to descend into the pharaoh and empower his reign. This moment marked the divine ascension of the pharaoh, not just a political leader, but a god-king. He was understood to be the earthly incarnation of Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship, who symbolized divine protection and rightful rule. The sun god Ra was also intimately connected to the pharaoh's identity, his radiance and life-giving power flowing through the ruler. To the people, the pharaoh was a bridge between the mortal world and the divine, tasked with maintaining the harmony of the cosmos. Following the coronation, the pharaoh's role was transformed in the eyes of all. His words carried divine weight, and his decisions were regarded as the will of the gods. He was expected to embody justice, wisdom, and strength, guiding Egypt through times of prosperity and challenge alike. The ceremony was both a beginning and a binding contract, a sacred trust between ruler and realm. The newly anointed pharaoh then undertook a series of rituals to publicly demonstrate his power and divine favor. He made offerings to the gods in their temples, participated in grand processions through the cities, and was celebrated by his people with songs and dances. These acts reaffirmed his sacred mission and allowed the people to witness the manifestation of divine authority on earth. Despite the grandeur and ritual, the ceremony also marked a deeply personal transformation. The young pharaoh, once a child with dreams and doubts, now carried the full weight of leadership and divinity. The role demanded not only strength and courage, but humility before the gods and the acknowledgement of his responsibility to all Egyptians. He was, in many ways, alone, set apart by destiny, yet bound to the welfare of millions. Throughout his reign, the pharaoh would revisit this sacred identity, renewing his commitment to uphold Ma'at through ritual and governance. Coronation was not a single moment in time, but a continuous journey, one that required constant vigilance, spiritual devotion, and wise leadership. The divine ascension gave the pharaoh a purpose that transcended life itself, linking him eternally to the gods and the eternal order of the universe. This sacred transformation was the cornerstone of ancient Egyptian civilization. It ensured that the pharaoh's power was never merely earthly, but eternally sanctioned by the gods. The symbolism, ceremony, and spiritual weight of the coronation imbued his reign with meaning and authority that echoed through the ages, making the pharaoh both a ruler of men and a living god whose legacy would be remembered forever. The life of a pharaoh was one of profound responsibility, ceremony, and purpose, yet also marked by moments of quiet reflection and personal routine. As the living embodiment of divine authority, the pharaoh's every action was imbued with meaning, balancing the demands of governance, spirituality, and leadership. His days followed a carefully structured rhythm designed to uphold Ma'at, the cosmic order that sustained Egypt and its people. Each morning began before dawn, as the first light touched the desert sands and the gentle flow of the Nile whispered through the palace gardens. The pharaoh awoke in his chamber, surrounded by fine linens, intricate woodwork, and symbols of his divine status. Attendants moved silently to prepare him for the day, bathing him with fragrant oils, dressing him in linen robes embroidered with gold and lapis lazuli, and adorning him with the regalia of kingship. This ritual of preparation was both practical and symbolic, a daily reaffirmation of his sacred role. After dressing, the pharaoh engaged in personal purification rituals, cleansing his body and spirit in accordance with religious customs. He might visit the palace shrine, offering prayers and incense to the gods who watched over him and his reign. These moments of solitude were vital, grounding him in the divine purpose that guided every decision. The morning was often devoted to governance. In the grand audience hall, the pharaoh met with his council of viziers, priests, military commanders, and scribes. Here the affairs of the kingdom were discussed, from agricultural planning and tax collection to foreign diplomacy and military campaigns. The pharaoh listened attentively, weighing advice and issuing decrees that would ripple across the land. His word was law, yet wise rulers surrounded themselves with trusted advisors, knowing that leadership was a shared burden. Justice was a central theme of the pharaoh's rule. He acted as the supreme judge, hearing petitions from citizens, settling disputes, and ensuring that Ma'at was upheld throughout society. While many legal matters were delegated to officials, the pharaoh's involvement underscored his role as the source of order and fairness. Stories of pharaohs personally intervening in cases to bring mercy or uphold justice were common, reinforcing their image as compassionate rulers. Midday offered a respite from the demands of statecraft. The pharaoh might retreat to the palace gardens, a lush oasis of date palms, flowering plants, and fountains that provided shade and tranquility. Here he could enjoy quiet moments of reflection or engage in leisurely pursuits, such as listening to music, watching dancers, or appreciating poetry recited by court artists. These interludes were essential for maintaining balance between the weighty responsibilities of kingship and the human need for peace. Physical training was another important aspect of the pharaoh's life. Though he ruled as a god-king, he was also expected to embody strength and vitality. Archery, wrestling, and hunting were not only practical skills, but symbolic acts demonstrating courage and mastery over nature. Participating in hunts, often staged in the marshes or deserts, allowed the pharaoh to display prowess and connect with traditions that linked him to warrior gods like Set and Anhur. The spiritual dimension of daily life was never far from the pharaoh's mind. Frequent visits to temples and participation in religious ceremonies reinforced his role as high priest and mediator between gods and people. The pharaoh performed rituals to honor the gods, offer sacrifices, and renew the sacred bonds that maintained Ma'at. Priests and temple officials accompanied him, guiding the ceremonies with chants and offerings. These acts were public affirmations of divine favor and the pharaoh's sacred mission. Art and architecture were also integral to the pharaoh's life and legacy. From commissioning grand temples and statues to overseeing tomb construction, the pharaoh's patronage shaped the physical and cultural landscape of Egypt. These projects were both expressions of piety and demonstrations of power, designed to immortalize his name and ensure harmony between the mortal and divine realms. The pharaoh might visit building sites, reviewing progress and offering blessings, underscoring his connection to the workers and craftsmen who realized his vision. Meals were another facet of daily life rich in ritual and symbolism. The pharaoh's table was laden with the finest foods: bread baked from the fertile Nile silt, figs, dates, wine from carefully tended vineyards, and delicacies from far-flung lands. Eating was often a ceremonial act, accompanied by music and conversation with family, nobles, and trusted officials. These moments fostered bonds and reaffirmed the social order within the palace walls. Family life, though often private, played an important role in the pharaoh's world. His queen was not only a partner, but a vital political and spiritual figure, often involved in religious rites and governance. Children of the royal family were educated from birth to continue the sacred lineage, and the pharaoh's relationships with family members shaped alliances and succession. Moments of affection, play, and tenderness balanced the formalities of court life, reminding the pharaoh of his humanity amid divine duties. Despite the grandeur, the role of pharaoh was demanding and at times isolating. The weight of leadership, the expectations of divine perfection, and the ever-present need to maintain order left little room for error. The pharaoh's decisions affected millions, and failure could bring chaos. Yet within this pressure lay a profound sense of purpose and connection to something eternal. As day gave way to evening, the pharaoh participated in further rituals, lighting sacred fires, offering prayers, and preparing for the journey into the realm of night. The palace grew quiet, lit by oil lamps casting gentle shadows on walls adorned with scenes of gods and kings. The pharaoh rested, gathering strength to meet the challenges of tomorrow. In these rhythms of governance and ritual, strength and reflection, the pharaoh embodied the heart of ancient Egypt. His life was a constant balance between the earthly and the divine, between power and service. Through his daily actions, he maintained the harmony of the kingdom, ensuring that the Nile continued to flow, the people flourished, and the eternal dance of Mahat endured. To be pharaoh in ancient Egypt was to walk in two worlds, not only as king and leader of men, but as the highest priest in a realm where gods walked among mortals. His crown did not merely symbolize authority over a nation. It was a divine emblem, a sign that he stood as the living conduit between heaven and earth. His role in religious life was not optional or ceremonial alone. It was the sacred spine of Egypt's spiritual identity, grounding the cosmic balance in the steady rhythm of prayer, ritual, and faith. Every sunrise was sacred, for it echoed the rebirth of Ra, the sun god, who crossed the heavens in his celestial bark. And each day, the pharaoh's first obligation was not to politics or warfare, but to the gods. The pharaoh rose before dawn, bathed in ritual purity, and journeyed, in person or symbolically through temple priests, to offer morning prayers and incense. These acts were not private devotions, but national necessities, renewing the gods' favor and recharging the cosmic energy that kept Egypt in order. Temples were more than religious structures. They were centers of power, economy, education, and culture. Yet at their heart was mystery and reverence, and the pharaoh was their guardian. He commissioned temples to the great gods, to Ammon at Karnak, to Horus at Edfu, to Isis on the island of Philae. In doing so, he wasn't simply building monuments. He was strengthening the spiritual fabric of the nation, anchoring the gods' presence in stone, light, and sacred geometry. These projects reaffirmed the pharaoh's divine favor and reminded the people that the gods walked with them. In his role as high priest, the pharaoh took part in essential festivals that aligned the rhythms of nature with the heavens. One of the most important was the Opet festival, celebrated in Thebes, where the statue of Ammon was carried in procession from Karnak to Luxor. This symbolic journey of the gods' image through the city, accompanied by music, dance, offerings, and joy, represented divine renewal, and by extension, the renewal of the pharaoh's power and the land's fertility. While priests performed the majority of rituals, the pharaoh's presence was critical. He was the living embodiment of Horus, the intermediary whose heart beat in tune with the gods. Another pivotal event was the Est festival, a jubilee celebrated after the pharaoh had ruled for 30 years, though sometimes it was performed earlier to affirm strength and vitality. It was both physical and symbolic. The pharaoh ran ceremonial courses, demonstrating his continued fitness to rule, and underwent rites that represented his death and spiritual rebirth. These rituals reaffirmed the pharaoh's eternal bond with the gods, and declared him not just king of Egypt, but a being reborn into divine power once more. Through such acts, religion and rulership fused into one seamless identity. Within the daily rituals of temple life, the pharaoh's spiritual authority remained ever present, even if not always enacted directly. The priests who conducted the day-to-day rituals, bathing the gods' statues, clothing them, offering food and incense, did so on the pharaoh's behalf. Every hymn sung, every offering made, was traced back to his divine responsibility. The temples echoed not only with chants to the gods, but with the pharaoh's name spoken aloud in ritual as a blessing and a vow, the king who kept Maat alive. And Maat, the principle of balance, truth, justice, and harmony, was the guiding light of all spiritual life. The pharaoh did not simply worship Maat, he was expected to live it, to protect it, and to reflect it in all he did. To rule unjustly, to allow chaos to take root in the land, was not merely a failure of leadership, it was a failure of cosmic duty. This expectation was immense, but to uphold Maat was to be in alignment with the gods themselves, and thus with eternity. Offerings were constant: food, flowers, oils, water, incense. These were not only gifts, but sustenance for the gods, whose well-being in turn sustained the land. The pharaoh's involvement in these rituals, even symbolically, reinforced the cycle. When the gods were pleased, the Nile would flood, the crops would grow, and the people would thrive. Beyond the grand temples and public festivals, the pharaoh's spiritual role also extended to death and the afterlife. He planned his tomb not as a resting place, but as a temple for eternity, a spiritual gateway through which his soul would ascend, and where generations of priests would continue to honor his divine legacy through ritual offerings. His journey through the afterlife would be guided by spells and invocations, many of which he had personally commissioned and recited during his lifetime. In this way, his religious role extended even beyond his reign on earth. In every gesture, in offerings, festivals, prayers, architecture, and law, the pharaoh wove himself into the very breath of the gods. His life was not his own, but one lived in devotion to a vision far larger than any man. A universe in balance, a world in harmony, where the spiritual and the material moved together in sacred rhythm. It is no wonder that for thousands of years, Egyptians revered their kings not simply as rulers, but as anchors of the universe. Through his religious role and rituals, the pharaoh became not just the head of state, but the steady flame at the heart of the divine order, a flame that, once lit, carried Egypt forward through eternity. To rule ancient Egypt was to rule not only with power, but with balance, and at the heart of that balance was justice. The pharaoh was more than a monarch. He was the guardian of Maat, the sacred principle of truth, balance, and moral order. His duty was not simply to lead armies or commission monuments, but to ensure that the daily lives of his people flowed in harmony, that justice was done, that the innocent were protected, and that society remained whole. The pharaoh's throne room was not just a seat of authority, it was a court of cosmic equilibrium. Every law issued, every decree proclaimed, was meant to reflect Maat. In his role as the ultimate judge, the pharaoh stood not above the law, but as its living expression. His decisions were seen as morally binding, not only for their fairness, but because they echoed divine will. When he judged disputes or signed verdicts, he was believed to speak with the wisdom of the gods. The day-to-day running of the kingdom was immense in scale. Egypt stretched over deserts and riverbanks, from the delta in the north to the borders of Nubia in the south. To govern effectively, the pharaoh appointed a network of viziers, nomarchs, regional governors, scribes, and high officials. These men, many of whom were priests or nobles, carried out the pharaoh's policies and ensured that his justice reached the far corners of the land. At the center of this system stood the vizier, the pharaoh's most trusted advisor and the highest official in the bureaucracy. The vizier oversaw tax collection, irrigation projects, temple management, and the courts. He was often present during royal audiences, acting as a voice of reason and a channel through which the pharaoh's will passed into daily law. While the pharaoh remained the final authority, It was the vizier who ensured the smooth functioning of the kingdom. The scribes played a crucial role in justice and governance. Masters of writing and record-keeping, they documented laws, land boundaries, harvest yields, temple donations, and court proceedings. Nothing was too small to be recorded. Through their meticulous work, fairness could be maintained across generations, land disputes could be resolved, taxes could be fairly assessed, and royal decrees could be remembered and enforced. The pharaoh also presided, in principle, over the law courts. While many local disputes were handled by lower officials, the king was the embodiment of final judgment. His legal authority extended to criminal cases, civil disagreements, and matters involving inheritance or land. His intervention was rare, but when it came, it carried immense weight. The people believed that if the pharaoh heard their plea, truth would triumph. His word was absolute, but guided by the expectation that he would rule with compassion, patience, and clarity. Justice in ancient Egypt was not punitive by nature. Punishment existed, certainly, and could be harsh in extreme cases, but the system was built more on restoration and moral alignment than on vengeance. The aim was to restore Ma'at, to return the world to its rightful balance. This philosophy shaped not only criminal law, but the expectations placed on rulers and officials at every level of society. The pharaoh also took great care in disaster response and public welfare. In times of famine or flood, he was expected to provide aid and reassurance. Grain from royal granaries was distributed, and festivals were held to boost morale and re-establish unity. These moments demonstrated the pharaoh's deeper role, not only as enforcer of the law, but as shepherd of the people, offering stability and hope in moments of uncertainty. Even international diplomacy was infused with justice. Peace treaties, such as the famous agreement with the Hittites, were seen as extensions of the pharaoh's wisdom. In such documents, he did not simply negotiate power, he established peace as a reflection of divine order. His role extended beyond borders, presenting Egypt as a moral light in a sometimes chaotic world. What made Pharaoh's justice so powerful was not fear, but faith. The people believed he was chosen by the gods, not for his strength alone, but for his sense of what was right. They trusted that beneath the golden crown and formal speeches was a man, one deeply bound to the laws of heaven and earth and committed to the dignity of his people. And so, in palace courts and village councils, from Nile-side disputes to matters of state, the pharaoh's justice shaped every corner of Egyptian life. It brought structure to a vast and diverse kingdom. It gave the lowly farmer the confidence to speak, and the nobleman the expectation of accountability. It made Egypt not only a land of pyramids and temples, but a society where order, fairness, and sacred duty held sway. In upholding Ma'at, the pharaoh ensured not just peace, but meaning. His justice did not come from fear of chaos, but from devotion to harmony. It was a justice designed not to punish, but to preserve the beauty of a world shaped by gods and guarded by kings. In ancient Egypt, to rule was to leave a mark not only on the present, but on eternity. The pharaoh's legacy was not something left to chance. It was sculpted from stone, etched into temple walls, and laid beneath desert sands. Through great monuments and sacred tombs, the pharaoh ensured that his name, his deeds, and his devotion would outlast the passage of time. These were not simply structures. They were symbols of cosmic permanence, built to honor the gods, preserve order, and guide the pharaoh's soul through the eternal journey. From the moment a pharaoh took the throne, the process of legacy building began. His reign would be measured not only by harvests or military victories, but by what he left behind. Temples, obelisks, sphinxes, and colossal statues, these were the language through which his story would be told for centuries to come. One of the most enduring forms of legacy was the temple. Temples were not merely places of worship. They were centers of national pride, economy, and community. Commissioning a temple meant aligning oneself with the gods in a lasting and visible way. The pharaoh would select a site, often one already sacred, and order the construction of vast complexes adorned with towering pylons, painted reliefs, and endless columns. These temples served as homes for the gods' earthly forms and a stage upon which the pharaoh's piety played out in full. The pharaoh's image was carved again and again along temple walls, offering food and incense to the gods, smiting enemies under divine protection, standing tall as Horus reborn. Each scene was more than art. It was a visual declaration of his sacred duty, his strength, and his alignment with Maat. These carvings were not meant only for his people. They were messages to the gods, to the ancestors, and to the ages. Among the grandest and most iconic symbols of legacy were the pyramids. Though the age of pyramid building had largely passed by the time of the New Kingdom, earlier pharaohs had raised these immense structures as both tomb and testament. The Great Pyramid of Khufu still stood as a marvel in the desert, a reminder to all pharaohs who followed that their legacy must rise as high as their vision. Later pharaohs turned instead to hidden tombs nestled within the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, carefully designed, elaborately painted, and sealed away from thieves. These tombs were not meant to be seen by the public, but by the gods and by the pharaoh's own soul as it journeyed into the afterlife. The winding corridors and vaulted chambers told the story of that sacred voyage, with every wall inscribed with spells, prayers, and star maps. The tomb was both a resting place and a launch point, the gateway to eternity. No detail was spared in this final home. The ceiling might be painted as the sky goddess Nut, stretching across the heavens, her stars shimmering in gold. The walls might depict scenes from the Book of the Dead or the Amduat, showing the pharaoh's passage through the underworld, facing serpents, gates, and guardians until he emerged reborn in the light of Ra. Sarcophagi were carved from solid stone, fitted with gold, and inlaid with lapis, turquoise, and obsidian, symbols of divine protection. These tombs and temples were also monumental efforts of labor and planning. Thousands of workers, artisans, architects, stonemasons, and laborers contributed to the creation of these legacies. They lived in organized workers' villages, such as Deir el Medina, and took pride in their sacred craft. To carve a pharaoh's name into stone was not merely a job, but an act of devotion, a means of inscribing their ruler's divine essence into the very bones of the earth. Beyond the monumental, legacy lived in names. The pharaoh's cartouche, his royal name enclosed in a protective oval, was chiseled into temples, stelae, obelisks, and even household items. As long as his name was spoken, the pharaoh's soul would live on. Thus, naming was an act of immortality. Some pharaohs even restored the names of predecessors whose legacies had been defaced, a sacred act of reviving a soul from the silence of history. But legacy was not only about grandeur. It was also about memory, about being remembered as a just ruler, a builder of harmony, a servant of Maat. A pharaoh who brought peace, who restored order, who cared for the temples and nourished the people, could live on in hearts as surely as in stone. Monuments crumbled, tombs were looted, and names forgotten, but stories whispered through generations had their own quiet power. This longing for permanence, for a legacy that transcended mortality, was not vanity but belief. The pharaoh did not see death as an end, but as a transformation. His tomb was a portal, his temple a mirror, his statue a vessel through which his spirit could continue to serve. He built not only for memory, but for eternity. And so, as the sun set across the golden sands and shadows lengthened on the temple walls, the pharaoh's legacy stood firm. Carved in stone, wrapped in myth, sung in praise, and carried on the wind, it endured. Each monument was a prayer, each tomb a promise, that even when the voice had faded and the crown was gone, the spirit of the pharaoh would still walk beside the Nile, beneath the stars, in the eternal rhythm of Egypt. In ancient Egypt, death was not an ending, but a crossing, a sacred passage from one realm to another, rich with meaning and ceremony. For the pharaoh, this journey was especially significant. He was not simply a man approaching death, but a god returning home. His soul was destined to traverse the hidden landscapes of the afterlife, to face divine judgment, and if found worthy, to ascend among the stars and gods. The preparations began long before the final breath. From the moment he took the throne, the pharaoh worked to shape not only his legacy on earth, but the path he would walk in eternity. His tomb was not a resting place, but a carefully engineered gateway to the Duat, the vast and mysterious underworld. Inside its walls, no detail was left to chance. Spells were painted in luminous colors, scenes of gods and guardians carefully carved into stone. Every passage, every chamber, every symbol held purpose, to guide the pharaoh's spirit through the perilous night and into everlasting light. At the time of death, the pharaoh's body was prepared with the highest reverence. Mummification was an act of sacred preservation, a ritual of transformation. Priests, dressed as the god Anubis, washed and anointed the body with oils and resins, wrapping it in layer upon layer of fine linen. Amulets were tucked between the wrappings, the scarab for protection, the eye of Horus for healing, the ankh for eternal life. These were not decorations, they were spiritual tools, each one a silent companion for the journey ahead. The funeral itself was a profound affair. Royal processions moved through the necropolis with chants and offerings, carrying the pharaoh's sarcophagus toward the tomb. Priests performed the opening of the mouth ceremony, a rite that symbolically restored the senses to the deceased, allowing him to breathe, speak, and eat in the afterlife. Food, furniture, clothing, and even boats were placed in the tomb, all things the pharaoh would need in the next world. Gold shimmered in the torchlight, not as wealth, but as the flesh of the gods, a promise of divinity beyond death. But the most important journey began in silence, after the tomb was sealed. In the stillness of the Duat, the pharaoh's Ba, his personality, and Ka, his life force, separated from the body and began their trials. The Duat was not a place of torment, but a realm of mystery and challenge, filled with serpents, lakes of fire, gates guarded by spirits, and riddles known only to the wise. It was a place where order and chaos wrestled for dominance, and where only the righteous could pass unharmed. The pharaoh carried with him sacred texts like the Book of the Dead, the Amduat, or the Book of Gates, scrolls and wall paintings filled with spells and guidance. These were spiritual maps, detailing every stage of the night's journey. Through them, the pharaoh knew the names of the guardians at each gate, the passwords to pass safely, and the hymns to summon divine protection. Eventually, the pharaoh would arrive at the Hall of Two Truths, where the final judgment took place. Here stood Osiris, god of the dead, flanked by Maat, goddess of truth and balance. Before them, the pharaoh's heart, the seat of his conscience, was weighed against the feather of Maat. This was the ultimate test. Had he ruled with justice? Had he upheld Maat in life? If the heart was found to be light and pure, the pharaoh was declared true of voice, Mashkeru, and allowed to pass into eternity. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it was devoured by Amit, the fearsome devourer of the dead. But for the righteous pharaoh, vindication awaited. Having passed judgment, the pharaoh was reborn, radiant and divine. He joined Ra in the solar bark, sailing through the heavens by day and through the underworld by night. He became one with the stars, with the gods, and with the eternal light. His spirit lived on in the temple rituals, in the whispers of priests, and in the rising of the sun. In the afterlife, he was no longer a ruler of men. He was a keeper of cosmic balance, an immortal force working alongside the gods to maintain the order of the universe. This belief in life after death was not born of fear, but of profound hope. It reflected a worldview rooted in harmony, responsibility, and the eternal cycle of renewal. For the pharaoh and for every Egyptian, death was not darkness, but a continuation of the divine story. Even centuries later, when tombs were rediscovered and names reawakened from silence, the pharaoh's presence still lingered. His afterlife journey, carefully crafted through faith, ritual, and memory, echoed across the sands and stars. Long after a pharaoh had drawn his final breath, after the incense had faded and the tomb was sealed beneath the shifting sands, his legacy continued, not only in stone, but in spirit. For the Egyptians, memory was sacred. To remember a name was to give it breath again. And so, the pharaoh's story lived on, in the hymns sung by priests, in the tales told by scribes, in the quiet reverence of temple walls still warmed by the sun. A pharaoh's legacy was not judged solely by the grandeur of his monuments or the wealth of his tomb, but by the harmony he brought to Egypt. Had he upheld Ma'at? Had he listened to his people, honored the gods, nourished the land, and protected the borders? These questions echoed in the records of the scribes and the prayers of the people. A just pharaoh became more than a memory. He became a model, a beacon of divine kingship. Temples long after his reign would still speak his name, inscribed in hieroglyphs, a cartouche etched carefully into the columns, declaring him eternal. His likeness stood in statues with calm, timeless eyes and arms at peace, hands holding the crook and flail, symbols not of tyranny, but of duty. These images were not portraits of power alone. They were affirmations of spiritual strength, of a leader who served both heaven and earth. But the pharaoh's legacy also lived in quieter places. In the village farmer who offered a handful of grain at a shrine. In the school where scribes copied his decrees line by line. In the prayers whispered during floods and droughts, asking for the wisdom and steadiness of past kings. The pharaoh had become part of Egypt's moral memory, braided into the rhythm of life. Some pharaohs faded, their names chipped away, their monuments repurposed. Others endured for thousands of years, their stories carried on temple walls, their treasures rediscovered in the glow of modern torches, still dazzling after millennia. Yet even the forgotten rulers had once stood beneath the same sky, faced the same responsibilities, and walked the same sacred path. Each left some mark, some trace in the sands of time. The pharaoh was not remembered as perfect, but as purposeful. His role had never been easy. He was king and servant, warrior and priest, father and judge. He carried Egypt's fate upon his shoulders, not in isolation, but in deep connection to the people, the gods, and the land. He was bound to something larger than himself, part of a lineage of sacred responsibility stretching backward and forward through history. And perhaps that is the most enduring legacy. The pharaoh as symbol of sacred duty, someone who rose each day not for personal gain, but to protect balance, to serve the divine, and to be a pillar of stability in a changing world. That image, more than gold or granite, is what survives. Today, the stones still speak, the Nile still flows, the stars still rise in the same sky that once watched over the kings of the two lands. And though time has buried many names, the essence of the pharaoh, as guardian, guide, and servant of Ma'at, remains. In every footprint left in the desert, in every story whispered in the hush of a museum, in every child who looks up at the image of a golden mask and wonders who once wore it, the pharaoh lives on. In ancient Egypt, every morning began with the river. The Nile, the lifeblood of the land, shaped not only the geography and economy of ancient Egypt, but also the rhythm of daily life. Its waters flowed from the far south and spilled into the Mediterranean Sea, nourishing the narrow band of fertile soil along its banks. For the average civilian, the Nile was both a source of survival and a spiritual force, a constant presence, dependable, sacred, and always moving. Most Egyptians lived in small, modest homes made of sun-dried mud brick. These homes were built close together in villages, clustered along the river's edge or near canals that connected to the main waterway. Life was communal, and mornings were rarely quiet for long. As the sun began to rise above the eastern horizon, casting a golden glow across the fields and rooftops, the villages would begin to stir. The first sounds of the day were often the gentle bleating of goats, the flap of geese wings, or the creak of a wooden door swinging open. Farmers, artisans, and traders would rise early, often before the full light of dawn. Women would stoke the hearths, prepare bread dough, and gather water from the river or local well. Children might be seen chasing chickens through the dust or peeking curiously out from the doorways. The scent of baking bread was one of the most familiar aromas of the Egyptian morning. Most households made their own loaves from emmer wheat or barley, ground by hand using large grinding stones. This task, dusty, repetitive, and physically demanding, was often done by women or female servants each day. The flour was mixed with water and yeast, formed into flat loaves, and baked in small clay ovens heated with straw or wood. The structure of Egyptian society encouraged an early and organized start to the day. For the farmer, especially time and temperature, were essential guides. Working the fields had to be done during the cooler hours of morning and early afternoon. Crops like wheat, barley, onions, and flax were common, and work often involved irrigation, sowing, harvesting, or caring for animals such as oxen and donkeys. Despite the often difficult labor, daily life was not rushed or chaotic. The seasons followed the patterns of the Nile, the inundation or flooding, the emergence of fertile soil, and the dry season. Egyptians understood these cycles deeply. In many ways, their pace mirrored the river itself, steady, methodical, and in harmony with nature. Spiritual life was woven into the fabric of each day, even during the most routine activities. At sunrise, many families would pause to offer a short prayer or quiet gesture to the gods. Ra, the sun god, was especially honored in the morning, as he was believed to sail across the sky in his solar boat, bringing light and life to the world. A small altar or statue might sit in the corner of a household, holding a flower, a few crumbs of bread, or a pinch of incense, simple offerings made in reverence and gratitude. Children, too, had their part in these mornings. Depending on the family's status and location, some children would help with chores, run errands to the market, or begin simple apprenticeships. Others might attend scribal school if they were among the few being trained for official or priestly roles. These schools, often attached to temples, taught boys to read and write using hieroglyphs and hieratic script. Lessons were long and involved copying texts onto shards of pottery or pieces of papyrus, usually under the stern but steady guidance of a senior scribe. Clothing for the day was simple and suited to the hot climate. Most people wore linen garments, lightweight, breathable, and cool. Men typically wore kilts or skirts tied at the waist, while women often wore sheath dresses held up with straps. Children ran barefoot and often wore very little until they grew older. Jewelry, made from copper, faience, and beads, was common across all classes and served both decorative and protective functions. As the day continued, the rhythm of morning gave way to the heat of midday and the work ahead. But those early hours, filled with the scent of bread, the hush of sunrise, and the quiet activity of family life, set the tone for everything that followed. In Egypt, time was measured not by the ticking of clocks, but by the movement of the sun and the flow of the Nile. To understand morning in ancient Egypt is to understand calm order, a society grounded in balance, ritual, and deep connection to the natural world. There was no concept of haste, no alarm bells ringing, only the soft unfolding of a new day, just as it had unfolded for centuries. In this way, the Nile did more than provide water. It gave rhythm to life. It was the quiet heartbeat of a civilization that rose with the sun and bowed gently to the day ahead. In ancient Egypt, the vast majority of people were farmers. They lived close to the river, close to the land, and close to the cycles of nature. Their work shaped the entire kingdom, feeding everyone from the humblest laborer to the mighty pharaoh. Though they had little wealth and no grand tombs to preserve their names, they formed the foundation of the ancient Egyptian world. Life, as a farmer, followed the rhythm of the Nile. Each year, the river would flood its banks between June and September, an event known as the inundation. This annual rising of the water was both expected and celebrated. It deposited a thick layer of rich, dark silt onto the farmlands, a gift from the gods, renewing the soil for planting. During the flood months, the fields were too wet to work. This was a time of rest and preparation. Farmers would repair tools, tend to livestock, and perform maintenance on canals and irrigation ditches. They would also assist with large state projects like temple building or canal dredging, often as part of a system called corvée labor, a kind of tax paid through work instead of goods. When the waters receded in October, the land dried just enough to become workable once again. This marked the beginning of the planting season. Farmers would use wooden plows pulled by oxen to loosen the earth. Seeds, wheat, barley, lentils, or flax were scattered by hand and pressed into the soil by herds of animals or by walking barefoot across the fields. The work was simple, but not easy. Days began early to avoid the harshest heat. Men, women, and children all had roles. While men guided plows or dug irrigation channels, women might help sow seeds or gather reeds for basket making. Children would watch over sheep or chase birds away from the crops. It was a shared effort, born of necessity and tradition. Water was always at the center of farm life. Though the Nile had nourished the land, irrigation ensured that crops could survive in drier months. Farmers dug small channels from the river or used the shaduf, a counterbalanced pole and bucket, to lift water into trenches. In the cool hours of the morning and evening, families would walk barefoot through these ditches, checking the flow and adjusting stones to guide the water where it was needed. Harvest time came around March or April, when the crops were golden and tall. It was a busy and vital time. Farmers used sickles made from wood and sharp flint to cut the grain. The bundles were gathered and threshed by beating them against stone floors or letting oxen tread them down. The chaff was tossed into the air so that the wind could carry it away, leaving the precious grain behind. A portion of each harvest was kept by the family for food and trade. Another portion was paid as tax to the state. Scribes would arrive to record and collect the government's share, which was stored in large granaries. Though the system was not always fair, it was understood. The food gathered by farmers sustained the entire country, including priests, soldiers, and royalty, and in return, the pharaoh was expected to uphold Mat, the principle of balance, justice, and cosmic order. Despite the hard work, farming life had its comforts. Meals were simple but nourishing: bread, onions, lentils, dates, and a drink known as beer, which was thick, mildly fermented, and full of calories. Families would eat together in the shade of their homes, talking, laughing, and resting between tasks. Evenings were often spent sharing stories or music, while the stars stretched endlessly overhead. The tools of the farmer were humble: wooden plows, woven baskets, stone grinding tools, and sickles with flint blades. Clothing was practical, usually made of linen. In the heat, most people worked barefoot and wore little beyond a simple kilt or tunic. Jewelry was not uncommon, even for the poor. Small charms or beads strung together, believed to bring protection or good fortune. Religion was always nearby. Farmers often prayed to Osiris, god of fertility and agriculture, and to Renenutet, the cobra goddess who protected the harvest. Small offerings were left at local shrines or in the fields themselves: a handful of grain, a fig, a few drops of beer poured into the soil. These gestures, though quiet, reflected a deep spiritual connection to the land. For farmers, the passing of time was not counted in days or months, but in seasons: the flood, the sowing, the harvest. The land spoke to them, and they listened. They did not need calendars to know when to plant or when to rest. They could read the wind, the color of the sky, the song of birds returning from the south. Though they were rarely remembered by name in great temples or carved on stone walls, the farmers of ancient Egypt built their legacy with every basket of grain, every loaf of bread, every field turned by hand. Without them, there would have been no palaces, no pyramids, no golden tombs. Their lives were marked by effort, but also by rhythm and peace, a life in harmony with the earth and sky. In the end, the farmer's hands were worn, but his place in the world was secure. For as long as the Nile flowed and the sun rose over the eastern hills, the land would be worked. And every harvest, every flood, every rising stalk of grain would whisper the memory of those who had come before and those who would follow. The heart of ancient Egyptian life was not the temple or the palace, but the home. For the average person, the household was a place of comfort, protection, and deep connection. Though modest in size and built from humble materials, it was where children were raised, bread was baked, stories were shared, and daily life quietly unfolded, day after day, season after season. Most homes were made from sun-dried mud bricks, shaped by hand and baked in the warmth of the Egyptian sun. These bricks were laid to form thick walls that kept out the heat during the day and held warmth during the cooler nights. Roofs were flat and often used as extra living space, a place to sleep during hot evenings, to dry laundry, or to store supplies. Inside, the rooms were simple and practical: Many homes had just one or two main rooms. Floors were made of packed earth or stone. Walls were left natural or occasionally washed with white plaster to brighten the interior. Furniture was sparse but functional: low stools, woven mats, reed baskets, and small wooden tables. At the center of the home was the hearth, a clay or stone platform where meals were cooked and warmth was shared. This hearth was not only a place for fire, but for family. Around it, the rhythms of daily life played out. Preparing food, sharing stories, and tending to children. Even the poorest homes made space for this central focus, the source of nourishment and the symbol of care. Meals were simple and filling. Bread, baked fresh each day, formed the foundation of the Egyptian diet. The dough was made from barley or emmer wheat, kneaded by hand, and baked in clay ovens shaped like beehives. Alongside bread, people ate stews of lentils or beans, seasoned with garlic, leeks, and herbs. Fruits like figs and dates were common, and occasionally fish or fowl added variety when available. Beer, thick, slightly sour, and full of nutrients, was the everyday drink, brewed at home in clay jars. Families worked together to make their homes function smoothly. Women managed the household, tended gardens, raised children, and often took on tasks like weaving, grinding grain, or making oil and perfume. Men might build furniture, repair walls, or work outside in the fields or workshops. Older children helped with chores, while younger ones played with handmade toys, dolls, carved animals, or balls made from rags or leather. Domestic life was not isolated. Homes were clustered closely together, forming tight-knit communities. Neighbors shared food, water, news, and laughter. Children wandered freely between doorways. In the cooler hours of the day, women gathered outside to chat, grind grain, or braid hair. Life spilled out from the home into the streets and courtyards, blending private and public space in a gentle rhythm. Despite their modest surroundings, Egyptians took pride in keeping their homes clean and orderly. Clay jars held water, storage bins held grain, and pottery shelves displayed plates and bowls. Brooms made from palm fibers swept the floors, and incense burned to sweeten the air and honor the gods. Even in the humblest homes, beauty found its way in through patterned linens, colored beads, or the fresh scent of herbs growing in clay pots. Spirituality, too, lived inside the home. Small shrines stood in corners or near the entrance, holding statues or symbols of protective deities. Taweret, the hippo goddess, guarded women and childbirth. Bes, the squat, lion-faced god, watched over sleep and drove away bad spirits. Offerings were simple: a flower, a few drops of beer, a whisper of prayer. These household altars created a quiet, sacred space where the divine was never far away. Homes were places of birth and of rest. When babies were born, women from the community came to assist, bringing warm water and soothing words. Songs were sung to protect the child and mother, and amulets were tied near the bed for good luck. At the other end of life, when a family member passed away, the home became a place of mourning and of remembrance. Loved ones would place flowers and food in honor of the departed, lighting oil lamps to guide their spirit to the next world. Seasons passed slowly within these walls. The sun traced familiar lines across the floor. The sounds of morning, birds calling, water jars being filled, bread rising in the oven, returned each day. Life was predictable, yet never without meaning. The simplicity of the home did not lessen its importance. In fact, it magnified it. For in these quiet spaces, the core of Egyptian life was preserved, not in stone monuments, but in daily care, shared meals, and generations living side by side. Home was a sanctuary, a place of softness, of hard work, of small joys. While the grandeur of temples and tombs has survived the centuries, it is the homes, now long gone, their mud bricks returned to the earth, that held the real pulse of ancient Egyptian life. To step into one of those homes, thousands of years ago, would not have felt so strange. A mother calling to her children, the smell of stew simmering over a low flame, the distant sound of laughter from the courtyard. These moments are not so different from our own. And so, as the fire in the hearth burns low and the walls begin to glow with the golden light of evening, we remember that in every quiet home, In every soft corner of ancient Egypt, life was not just lived, it was cherished. In the world of ancient Egypt, words held power. Writing was not simply a way to record information, it was a sacred skill, a bridge between the earthly and the divine. And those who could master it, the scribes, were among the most respected members of society. Becoming a scribe was not common. Most children followed in the footsteps of their parents, working in the fields, the workshops, or along the riverbanks. But for a few, usually boys from families with some standing, the path to scribal training offered a different life. It was a life of ink and papyrus, of quiet study, and of service to both state and temple. The journey began young. A boy might be sent to the House of Life, a special school attached to a temple, or to a scribal workshop in a town or city. There, he would begin to learn the art of writing under the careful watch of older, experienced scribes. The first lessons were slow and repetitive. Students learned to hold a reed pen, cut to a fine point, and to mix ink from soot or ochre. They practiced the basic strokes again and again on pottery shards, smooth limestone flakes, or reused papyrus. Hieroglyphs, the sacred script, were beautiful but complex pictures that could represent sounds, ideas, or objects. Students also learned hieratic, a more practical script used for everyday writing. Discipline was strict. Mistakes were corrected quickly, and patience was expected. But the work was not without reward. Those who showed promise were taught to copy religious texts, poetry, legal documents, and royal decrees. In time, a skilled scribe could serve in many roles, recording harvests for the granary, writing letters for merchants, managing temple records, or even serving in the courts. The tools of the trade were simple, yet deeply symbolic. A small wooden pallet held 2 cakes of dried ink, red and black, along with a handful of reed pens. Papyrus scrolls, made from the pressed stems of the papyrus plant, were rolled and stored in jars or wooden boxes. A well-trained scribe could write with speed and elegance, producing lines of text that flowed as gracefully as the Nile itself. Scribes lived in both villages and cities, and their lives varied depending on their duties. Some worked in the royal bureaucracy, managing resources or recording laws. Others served temples, carefully copying hymns and rituals. Still others traveled with armies or construction teams, keeping track of supplies and workers. But wherever they were, scribes were valued not for their strength, but for their minds. Their role was not only practical. In Egyptian belief, writing was divine. It had been given to humanity by Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, who was said to have invented language itself. To write was to preserve truth, to maintain ma'at, the universal order and balance. A scribe's hand, then, was not just recording events, it was helping to hold the world together. Education was a path to stability and sometimes even social mobility. A talented scribe might rise through the ranks, gain land, or be appointed to important positions. Though most scribes lived modestly, they were rarely poor. Their work ensured food, clothing, and status, and often respect from their communities. But the work could also be long and tiring. Eyes strained from dim light, hands grew cramped from hours of writing, and mistakes could be costly. Yet many scribes took pride in their work. Some even wrote about it in poetic terms, comparing their pen to a sword, their words to eternal life. In their own quiet way, they became authors of history. At home, a scribe might be seen sitting cross-legged on the floor, scrolls unrolled across his lap, children watching with curiosity. He might teach his sons the basic signs or show them how to clean a reed pen. Though literacy was rare, it sometimes passed through generations, becoming a family tradition. Even in the grand tombs of nobles and officials, scribes were honored. In wall carvings and statues, they are shown with pens behind their ears, scrolls at their side, seated calmly with legs folded beneath them. Their legacy, unlike many, was not built from stone, but from lines of careful ink preserved for centuries. To understand the role of the scribe is to understand the quiet strength of knowledge, a life lived not through force, but through thought. In ancient Egypt, the pen was indeed mightier than the sword, and those who held it even in the smallest village or simplest court, carried the weight of a civilization's memory. In the hush of an ancient room, with the flicker of an oil lamp casting soft shadows on stone, a young student once copied the same line of script again and again, shaping not only letters, but his future. And as the Nile flowed gently outside the temple walls, another scribe added his name to a scroll that might travel across the kingdom or survive across time. In ancient Egypt, women played a vital role in the life of the household, the community, and the spiritual world. Though the society was patriarchal in structure, women were not silent figures. They were mothers, wives, workers, healers, and priestesses, central to both the private world of the home and, at times, the public world of ritual and service. Egyptian women lived with a level of independence that was unusual in many other ancient societies. They could own property, inherit land, make contracts, and appear in court. These rights were not limited to the wealthy. Even ordinary village women could sell goods in the market or manage a small piece of farmland. While most women spent their lives close to home, they were not invisible. Their presence was woven into every layer of Egyptian daily life. The most central role for many women was as the keeper of the household. They managed food, water, and supplies. They baked bread, brewed beer, cared for children, spun thread, and made clothing. These were not idle tasks. In a land where nearly everything was made by hand, the work of women was essential for survival. A woman's day began early. She might wake before sunrise to grind grain using heavy stones, her hands moving in slow, practiced circles. She would prepare the morning meal, check on the fire in the hearth, and fetch water from a nearby well or canal. Throughout the day, she would cook, clean, tend to children, and perhaps work on weaving or pottery. Textiles were an important part of a woman's work. Linen, made from the flax plant, was the most common fabric in Egypt. Women soaked, combed, spun, and wove flax into cloth using upright looms. The work was meticulous and time-consuming, but it produced the garments worn by nearly everyone in the kingdom, from farmers to pharaohs. In many households, women also acted as healers. Using knowledge passed down through generations, they prepared remedies from herbs, honey, and animal products. These treatments might be used to ease a cough, soothe a rash, or assist with childbirth. Medical papyri from ancient times show that women were knowledgeable about the body and its care, especially in matters related to fertility and pregnancy. Childbirth was a sacred and vulnerable moment. Women gave birth at home, assisted by midwives and surrounded by protective rituals. Amulets in the shape of Taweret, a pregnant hippopotamus goddess, were placed nearby to guard the mother and child. Special bricks were laid out for the woman to squat upon during labor, a common birthing position in ancient Egypt. Prayers and songs helped ease the pain and encourage a safe delivery. Women were also deeply connected to the spiritual world. In temples and homes alike, they participated in religious life. Some women became priestesses, especially in service to female deities like Hathor or Isis. Priestesses might play music during rituals, tend to temple offerings, or perform sacred dances. These roles were most often held by women of higher status, but they reflected a broader truth, that the feminine was honored in the Egyptian worldview. Many goddesses embodied qualities that women brought to their homes: fertility, protection, healing, and wisdom. Isis, the most beloved of all Egyptian goddesses, was a mother, a sorceress, a queen, and a mourner. Her stories were told in homes across the land, and women saw parts of themselves in her strength and sorrow. Hathor, too, was adored, the goddess of joy, music, and motherhood. She was sometimes called Mistress of the West, guiding souls into the afterlife with tenderness. Marriage in ancient Egypt was not a formal ceremony, but rather a domestic arrangement built on mutual agreement. Couples lived together, shared property, and raised children. Love poetry from the period shows that affection and companionship were highly valued. Husbands wrote admiringly of their wives, and wives expressed longing and devotion in return. Though husbands held legal authority, there was an underlying respect for the contributions of women. Of course, life was not always equal or easy. Some women lived in poverty, were married young, or experienced hardship. But within the home, they often held influence. They taught their children, made decisions about food and ritual, and kept family traditions alive. When a woman died, she was mourned with deep care. Her name would be spoken, her image carved or painted, her memory preserved. In tomb scenes, women are shown tenderly holding children, offering food to ancestors, or playing instruments during family feasts. They are remembered not only for what they did, but for the grace and wisdom they carried. Even now, as we study their lives through fragments, a bead necklace, a weaving tool, a faded painting on a wall, we glimpse something enduring. In the quiet corners of every home, in the warmth of the hearth and the rhythm of the loom, women shaped the world of ancient Egypt. They did not rule empires or command armies, but they ruled the spaces where life began and where it was sustained. And in that simple, steady power, they left a mark that time has not erased. In ancient Egypt, animals were more than just creatures of fur, feathers, or scales. They were companions, workers, protectors, symbols, and sometimes even gods. To live in Egypt was to live close to the natural world, to wake with the call of birds, to work beside cattle, and to share one's home with animals both tamed and wild. Cats were especially cherished. Sleek and graceful, they moved easily between the walls of the house and the edges of the field. Egyptians admired them for their elegance, their quiet confidence, and their usefulness. A cat in the home kept grain stores safe from rats and mice. They stalked pests silently, curling afterward at their owner's feet or beneath a shady basket. But beyond their usefulness, cats were sacred. The goddess Bastet, often shown with the head of a cat, was the protector of home and family, a gentle guardian of women and children. People wore amulets shaped like cats for good luck. In some homes, cats were even mummified and buried with care, a sign of how deeply they were loved. Chickens, ducks, and geese fluttered in courtyards and roamed freely through small villages. These birds were raised for their eggs, meat, and feathers. Children might help scatter grain for them at dawn, and the flapping of wings was a familiar sound during mealtime preparations. Their presence was ordinary and comforting, a small part of the daily rhythm. Larger animals played more demanding roles. Oxen pulled wooden plows through the fields, their heavy steps breaking the soil in preparation for planting. Donkeys carried baskets of grain, water jars, and bundles of flax along dusty roads. These animals were strong and dependable, rarely named, but always remembered. Even pets took their place in Egyptian homes. Dogs were kept for protection and hunting. Monkeys, though less common, were sometimes kept by the wealthy. In tomb paintings, animals often appear as part of the family, sitting under tables, walking beside their masters, or playing near the children. Beyond the home, the natural world teemed with life. Along the banks of the Nile, crocodiles lurked in the reeds, and hippos stirred the muddy water. These animals were dangerous, yet deeply respected. The crocodile god Sobek was worshipped as a symbol of strength and fertility. Temples were even built in his honor, sometimes near pools where real crocodiles were kept and cared for. Birds filled the skies and riverbanks, ibis, herons, geese, and falcons. Some were hunted, others admired. The falcon, in particular, was sacred, representing the god Horus. Its sharp eyes and soaring wings symbolized power and kingship. The ibis, linked to the god Thoth, was a symbol of wisdom and writing. Cattle were signs of wealth, and flocks of sheep and goats were tended by shepherds in the fields. Their wool, milk, and meat helped sustain communities. A family that owned even a few animals was considered fortunate. Livestock were carefully counted and recorded, especially during harvest season when tax collectors would visit each village. Even insects had their place. The scarab beetle, for example, became one of the most iconic symbols in all of ancient Egypt. Associated with the rising sun and the god Khepri, scarabs represented renewal and transformation. Small carvings of scarabs were worn as protective charms, tucked into clothes or carried in pockets. Animals were also central to Egyptian religion and myth. Some gods took animal form, while others shared their characteristics. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, watched over the dead. Hathor was often depicted as a cow, representing motherhood and nourishment. These divine associations shaped the way Egyptians saw the world around them, not as separate from animals, but connected. In death, as in life, animals followed their human companions. Cats, dogs, birds, and even bulls were sometimes buried with care, adorned with linen, and laid to rest in their own small coffins. Some were mummified for religious offerings, others simply remembered as loyal friends. To the ancient Egyptians, animals were not background figures. They were teachers, protectors, and reminders of the divine. They brought warmth to the home, strength to the field, and awe to the riverbanks. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the Nile shimmered in the fading light, the sounds of animals continued, soft bleats, gentle clucks, a distant howl. Their presence, so ordinary and yet so meaningful, echoed through every corner of Egyptian life. In ancient Egypt, religion was woven into every moment of daily life. It was not separate from work, family, or nature, but a quiet, steady presence, like the gentle flow of the Nile itself. The gods and goddesses were everywhere, in the fields, in the homes, in the stars above, and in the hearts of the people. Each Egyptian knew that the world was governed by a delicate balance called Ma'at. This was the principle of truth, justice, harmony, and cosmic order. To live well was to honor Ma'at by being kind, honest, and respectful to others, by performing rituals, and by keeping the gods pleased. It was a balance not just of law, but of spirit and nature. Faith was personal and communal. At home, families kept small shrines with statues or symbols of protective gods. Offerings of bread, beer, flowers, and incense were left quietly, sometimes with a whispered prayer. These acts were simple but meaningful, a way to invite the gods' blessing and protection. The temple was the heart of public worship, but it was not like a church or a place for large crowds. Instead, temples were sacred houses for the gods, where priests maintained the rituals and cared for the divine statues. The people rarely entered the inner sanctuaries, but offered prayers and gifts at temple gates or outside. Each city or village had its own set of gods, often connected to nature, animals, or local history. Some of the most widely revered included Ammon, the hidden one, Ra, the sun god who journeyed across the sky each day, Isis, the mother and magician, Osiris, the ruler of the afterlife, and Hathor, the joyful goddess of music and love. Religious festivals were important times of joy and renewal. They brought the community together to honor the gods with music, dance, feasting, and procession. During these festivals, statues of the gods might be carried through the streets on beautifully decorated boats or carts, surrounded by singing priests and happy crowds. Prayer was often poetic. Egyptians spoke to their gods with respectful and heartfelt words, asking for health, safety, and success in daily life. They thanked the gods for the blessings of the Nile's flood, for a good harvest, or for the birth of a child. At times of hardship, they turned to the gods for comfort and healing. Magic, or Heka, was an accepted part of religion. It was believed to be a natural force that could protect, heal, or harm, depending on its use. Amulets, spells, and charms were worn or placed around the home to guard against illness, evil spirits, or misfortune. Priests and magicians performed rituals to invoke this power, blending religion and magic seamlessly. Death was also deeply spiritual. Egyptians believed that life continued beyond the grave, in a world not unlike their own, but more peaceful and eternal. The journey to the afterlife required preparation and care. Families buried their loved ones with food, tools, and personal belongings. They recited prayers and spells from the Book of the Dead, a guide for safe passage. Central to this belief was Osiris, the god who ruled the underworld and judged the souls of the departed. To reach a happy afterlife, the deceased's heart had to be light and free from sin, balanced against the feather of Ma'at. This hope gave meaning and comfort to life and death alike. In all these ways, faith was never distant or abstract. It was part of the air, the soil, the water, and the daily steps of every person. It was in the way farmers prayed before planting, mothers blessed their children, and craftsmen carved symbols into their work. Ancient Egyptians did not see themselves as alone in the world. They believed they lived in a universe alive with gods, spirits, and magical forces. To honor these was to live in harmony, a harmony as gentle and enduring as the river that fed their land. And as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, the people would offer their last prayers of the day. A soft breath, a whispered name, a small gift left at the doorstep, all part of a world held together by faith, hope, and the quiet whispers of the gods. Even in a world shaped by hard work and daily rituals, ancient Egyptians found time for joy and celebration. Leisure was not merely a luxury, it was a vital part of life, a way to connect with family, honor the gods, and feel the sweetness of being alive. Music filled many moments, from quiet evenings at home to grand festivals in temple courtyards. Instruments were simple yet expressive: wooden flutes, small harps, tambourines, and drums made from stretched animal skin. Skilled musicians played melodies that lifted spirits, soothed children, or accompanied dancers swirling in colorful skirts. Singing was common. Songs told stories of love, nature, and the gods. Sometimes they praised the pharaoh or celebrated the harvest. Voices might rise together in harmony during festivals or softly hum in the background of a family meal. Music created an atmosphere of warmth and connection, as natural as the river's flow. Perfume was another cherished delight. Made from fragrant flowers, herbs, and resins, scents were carefully prepared by specialists called perfumers. They blended oils from lotus blossoms, myrrh, cinnamon, and frankincense, creating aromas that filled homes, temples, and royal courts. Both men and women wore perfumes daily, a gentle way to feel fresh in the desert heat. The art of perfume was also spiritual. Scented oils were used in religious ceremonies to honor the gods. They were poured over statues, burned in lamps, or rubbed into the skin during sacred festivals. The fragrance of incense was believed to carry prayers heavenward, weaving a delicate thread between earth and sky. Leisure often took place outdoors, where the warm sun and cool river breeze made gathering easy. Families would picnic on woven mats beneath palm trees. Children played games, tossing balls, racing wooden boats in canals, or solving riddles whispered under the shade. These moments of play balanced the seriousness of work with simple delight. Celebrations marked the calendar, especially during the Nile's flooding and harvest seasons. People came together to feast on roasted meats, fresh bread, fruits, and honeyed treats. Tables were laid with pottery dishes, and wine and beer flowed freely. Laughter and stories were shared as the sun set behind distant hills, painting the sky with soft colors. Dancing was a joyful part of these occasions. Both men and women moved to rhythms set by drums and clappers. Sometimes dances were graceful and slow, like the gentle flow of the Nile, other times lively and spirited, reflecting the excitement of the moment. Dancing connected people, weaving their bodies into a shared rhythm of celebration. Jewelry and clothing added sparkle to festivities. Bright beads, gold pendants, and colorful linens shimmered in the firelight. People adorned themselves not only for beauty, but as a sign of respect for the gods and their community. Wearing fine garments and ornaments was a way of honoring life's blessings. Evenings were a time for storytelling. Elders recounted ancient tales, myths of gods and heroes, lessons about courage and kindness. These stories traveled from generation to generation, becoming a living heritage that bound the past to the present. Listening to these tales by firelight was a soothing ritual, like a lullaby that nurtured both body and soul. In quieter moments, people found pleasure in the simple things. The taste of sweet dates, the feel of soft linen, the scent of blooming flowers. Gardens, both large and small, provided shade and beauty. Lotus ponds reflected the sky, while bees hummed softly among the reeds. Leisure and celebration in ancient Egypt were not escapes from reality, but moments of harmony within it. They honored the cycles of nature, the bonds of family, and the presence of the divine in everyday life. As night deepened and the stars blinked awake, the soft sounds of music might drift from a distant courtyard, mingling with the gentle whisper of the Nile. In these peaceful hours, the people of Egypt rested, their hearts light, their spirits lifted, ready to greet another day beneath the ever-watchful sun. In ancient Egypt, the world extended far beyond the sun-baked fields and mud-brick homes. The Nile was a lifeline that carried people and goods, ideas and stories, connecting villages, cities, and distant lands. Travel and trade were parts of daily life, opening windows to places unknown and weaving Egypt into a larger tapestry of cultures. For the average Egyptian, travel was usually slow and purposeful. Most journeys began at dawn, with families or merchants boarding small boats carved from cedar wood, sails billowing softly in the warm breeze. These boats moved gently along the river, guided by skilled oarsmen and navigators who read the stars and the currents with practiced eyes. The Nile was the highway of Egypt. It was easier and faster to travel by water than by the dusty, uneven roads that crisscrossed the land. Along the riverbanks, bustling ports grew where goods were loaded and unloaded. Farmers brought grain, fishermen their catch, and craftsmen their wares. Traders exchanged pottery, jewelry, perfumes, and textiles, treasures both everyday and exotic. Markets were lively places filled with color and sound. Vendors called out their goods, from fragrant spices and sweet dates to finely woven cloth and beautifully carved statues. People bartered, laughed, and shared news from faraway places. The marketplace was more than commerce. It was a place of community, connection, and storytelling. Some Egyptians ventured further, traveling beyond the familiar floodplains to distant deserts and foreign lands. Merchants journeyed to Nubia to the south, bringing back gold, ivory, and ebony. To the northeast, traders crossed into the Levant, exchanging Egyptian copper and linen for cedar wood, wine, and precious stones. Traveling was not always easy. Desert winds could be harsh, and dangers lurked along isolated routes. Caravans of donkeys and camels carried goods over rocky terrain, moving steadily under the hot sun. Travelers often stopped at way stations or small villages, resting in shaded courtyards, sharing food and stories before continuing onward. Pilgrimages to temples were also a common reason for travel. People journeyed to sacred sites such as Karnak, Abydos, or the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. These trips were acts of devotion and hope, to give thanks, to seek healing, or to ask the gods for guidance. Along the way, travelers might join others, forming groups for safety and companionship. Messages and letters traveled by boat and on foot, carried by couriers who raced across the land. Scribes wrote carefully on papyrus scrolls, sealing them with clay stamps. News from the court or distant villages spread slowly but surely, tying the vast kingdom together. Trade was more than exchange, it was a meeting of worlds. Through trade, Egyptians encountered new materials and ideas. They adopted foreign gods, new artistic styles, and technologies. Glassmaking, for example, was introduced from the Levant, while spices and perfumes came from as far away as Arabia and Africa. Goods traveled in both directions. Egypt's fertile lands produced abundant grain, flax for linen, papyrus for writing, and finely crafted jewelry and pottery. These treasures were highly sought after beyond Egypt's borders. Travel and trade also connected people's lives. Merchants brought stories of distant cities, travelers shared songs and customs, and goods carried the marks of hands far away. In this way, Egypt was not an isolated land, but part of a vast, interwoven world. Even for the average Egyptian, the river's flow and the hum of the marketplace whispered promises of adventure and possibility. Life was rooted in the land, but it also reached outward, carried by boats, caravans, and dreams. As the sun set behind the western hills, travelers might rest beside the Nile, listening to the soft splash of oars and the distant call of birds. They knew that, with the dawn, the journey would continue steady and sure, like the river itself. As the gentle flow of the Nile has carried us through the daily life of ancient Egypt, we arrive now at a quiet moment of reflection. The story of an average civilian is one of patience, community, and harmony, a life carefully balanced with the rhythms of nature and the cycles of the seasons. From morning light to evening stars, the people lived intertwined with the land, the river, and their families. Their homes were simple but filled with love. Their work was steady and purposeful, whether in fields, markets, or workshops. They cared for their children, honored their gods, and found joy in music, stories, and celebrations. The world around them was shaped by deep beliefs in balance, justice, and the unseen forces that moved the sun and the stars. Their lives were small threads woven into the vast tapestry of Egyptian civilization, each thread precious and necessary. Though history often shines its brightest light on pharaohs and grand monuments, it is the everyday lives of common people that truly bring the past to life. Their hopes, struggles, and quiet courage remind us that the heart of any culture beats strongest in its ordinary moments. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine the soft Nile breeze, the gentle songs by fireside, and the calm patience of those who lived thousands of years ago. Their story is a lullaby, a timeless melody of life flowing peacefully through time. May this gentle journey into the past bring you rest and dreams as calm and deep as the river itself.